The night breathed heavy over the Afghan valley, the kind of darkness that swallows the sound of men's hearts. Static hummed through the comms as a four-man Delta recon unit crawled beneath fractured moonlight, their silhouettes trembling against the sand. They weren't supposed to be there. The maps showed this ravine as empty, but the sky above disagreed. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat wrapped in cloud. Captain Hale led with his rifle drawn, whispering coordinates that made no sense to the satellite uplink. The desert wind shifted, metallic, charged, almost wet, and every man felt it. Something enormous was watching, unseen, yet impossibly close. They advanced anyway, unaware that every footstep was already recorded by something that didn't belong to the Earth. 2 weeks later, deep beneath the Pentagon, fluorescent lights flickered over a classified debrief chamber. Captain Hale's voice cracked as he described the shapes, his words muffled under the hum of air filtration. The officials across the table took notes without expression. Behind mirrored glass, unseen observers watched. Scientists, not soldiers. They rewound the recovered footage frame by frame, arguing in whispers about waveforms, magnetic interference, non-terrestrial geometry. Hale's hands shook as he lifted a Polaroid. 4 faint rings of light suspended above the valley. One man at the table whispered, "That's not atmospheric." Another replied, "Then it's not ours." The room went silent, except for the faint click of a projector beginning to play something none of them could explain. At 230 hours, a radar station in Nevada picked up an encrypted signal looping endlessly over an unused frequency. The technician thought it was a glitch until he decoded the first few bytes. The signal matched US Delta encryption, but the call sign belonged to a team long presumed lost. Each loop ended with the same faint audio, distorted breathing. A single word whispered through static. "Watching." The operator called his superior, who ordered immediate silence and recorded over the data. But the technician kept a backup. He listened again that night, volume low, heart pounding. On the 4th loop, the breathing stopped. Something else spoke, in a cadence almost human, yet layered, like multiple voices trying to imitate one. The Pentagon authorized a recovery flight under Project Sentinel, a classified mission with no insignia, no transponder, no record. The C-130 took off from Groom Lake under pre-dawn haze, its crew briefed only to retrieve debris of atmospheric significance. As they neared the coordinates, turbulence hit, not from weather, but from something bending air itself. Through the cockpit windows, the desert below shimmered with shifting reflections, like a mirror sea. The co-pilot swore he saw human figures moving within the mirage. Then the radar failed. Then the altimeter. The instruments read impossible numbers as light filled the cabin, bleaching faces white. In that light, for an instant, every man saw the same thing. Themselves standing outside the aircraft, watching. Weeks later, a Pentagon janitor found a VHS cassette wedged behind an air vent. No label, only the words Valley tape etched into its side. The footage began with familiar static, then the desert valley, filmed from an unknown perspective, too high for a handheld camera, too low for a satellite. The silhouettes of 4 soldiers moved across the sand. Then light flooded the frame, and for 2 seconds, a massive structure appeared. Metallic, translucent, impossible geometry twisting through the clouds. The screen tore in distortion. The tape's final seconds showed the same valley, empty, but a single human figure still visible, standing motionless beneath the pulsing sky. The janitor brought the tape to security. By morning, he was gone. Somewhere in a windowless sublevel beneath Fort Meade, data analyst Claire Mendez leaned over a wall of magnetic reels, spooling through recovered fragments from the Afghan operation. Her clearance tag read, Raven Tier 6. A level that technically didn't exist. Every frame she paused on showed impossible light distortions, self-replicating frequencies that encoded visual symbols within the stat. As she slowed one frame, the noise folded into an image. The valley, seen from orbit, glowing with geometric precision. Her screen flickered, and for a moment, her own reflection stared back. But not aligned with her movements. The recording was still playing, yet her double blinked first. Something inside the data was alive, responding to observation. She exhaled, whispering to no one. "It's looking back." When Mendez left the room, the monitors didn't turn off. The system rebooted itself, running the same footage she had just analyzed. But this time, the playback included a fifth voice on the comms. The voice identified itself as Hale. Problem was, Hale had never transmitted after the operation ended. The voice recited coordinates that didn't exist on any classified map. A latitude deep in the Pacific, near the Challenger Deep. The analysts upstairs thought it was corruption, an echo of old data. But one tech swore he heard breathing, layered under the transmission, not human, too slow, too deliberate. That night, the servers overheated, and the room smelled faintly of ozone and blood. By 300 hours, Mendez was escorted through a concrete corridor, lined with armed guards to a classified intelligence suite marked Project Dusk. Inside waited two generals, a physicist and a priest in military uniform. They asked her to play the footage again, but this time on analog projection. As the reels turned, the priest whispered Latin verses beneath his breath. The physicist's face went pale. The geometry forming on screen wasn't random. It mirrored molecular patterns in human DNA. The general leaned forward. "If it's sending this," he said, "it's not just watching, it's learning." The priest crossed himself. The light from the projector flickered red, then black, and in the darkness, the sound of breathing filled the room again. Hours later, NSA signal intercepts began spiking across multiple continents. Civilian radio towers picked up the same repeating pulse last recorded over the Afghan Valley, a rhythmic code at frequencies below human hearing. Pilots reported compass failures, and submarines in the Pacific logged ghost sonar echoes matching human speech patterns. Mendez traced the origin. It wasn't coming from Earth. It was orbiting. A satellite that didn't exist on any registry was rebroadcasting the Valley transmission globally. Her screen filled with cascading coordinates, each one corresponding to decommissioned U.S. bases. Then in real time, a new line appeared. Washington, D.C. At dawn, Fort Meade's entire power grid flickered and died. Every monitor lit up in sequence, each one displaying a single image. The Afghan Valley, under the same light that had swallowed Hale's teeth. The static pulsed like a heartbeat, faster and faster, until sound began forming words. Mendez recorded every frame, tears streaking her cheeks as the voice returned. It spoke her name, perfectly pronounced, Claire, then softer. "We remember you." The footage stuttered, and for a brief moment, every screen showed her. Standing in the desert wearing Delta fatigues, her eyes reflecting that impossible light. When the power finally failed, the message remained burned into every cathode surface. "We are still here." 3 days after the Fort Meade blackout, a coded directive descended through the Pentagon's darkest corridors. Project Dusk is now active. In a subterranean operations center carved into the Virginia bedrock, General Collier assembled the Black Ops contingent tasked with containment. They called it Operation Winter Veil. No press, no record, no trace. Their mission: neutralize the source of the transmission at all costs. Satellite imagery showed the Afghan Valley alive again with spectral light. As Collier briefed the men, the lights above dimmed, and the digital maps began to pulse in rhythm with the same frequency Mendez had uncovered. The general's reflection trembled on the glass screen. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "we're going to war with something that can hear us think." In a forgotten wing of Walter Reed, Captain Hale awoke to find himself hooked to monitors, his service record erased. Officially, he had died in 1987. A man in a gray suit entered without introduction, sliding classified papers across the bed. "You were never gone," he said. "We need you back." Hale's memory fractured, images bleeding through. White sky, geometric storms, the others screaming without sound. They promised him clarity if he returned to the site. He agreed, though he couldn't recall why the word valley made his chest tighten. When he looked into the mirrored window, he saw 4 reflections where only one should have been. They met again under cover of desert twilight, flown by unmarked helicopters to Groom Lake. Yorush. The hangar lights hummed over classified aircraft, but all eyes fixed on the object beneath a tarp. Metallic, translucent, its surface vibrating with faint resonance. The surviving Delta operators from Hale's unit stood silent as Mendez arrived, escorted by agents. "That's what's broadcasting," she whispered. The object's pulse quickened, responding to her voice. The air grew colder. A tremor passed through the hangar floor, knocking tools from racks. Then came the first sound, soft, distant, human-like, crying echoing from within the structure. One of the soldiers broke ranks and reached out. The moment his hand touched it, the lights died. Project Dusk authorized a live test. Recreate the valley's pulse frequency using classified emitter arrays buried beneath Groom Lake. Mendez and Hale stood in the control chamber, faces bathed in shifting blue light. The physicist in charge adjusted dials until the hum returned, the same tone that haunted every recording. Within seconds, nearby electronics began bleeding heat, metal panels warping as the frequency peaked. The object under the tarp flared bright white, rising slightly from the ground. Through the control window, Hale saw something take form inside the light. A shape resembling their lost medic, mouth open in silent scream. The glass cracked. "Turn it off," Mendez shouted. But the hum didn't stop. It was no longer coming from the machine. The power grid around Groom Lake failed at 407 hours. Emergency lights flickered red as alarms echoed through the compound. In the center of the hangar, the object had unfolded, each segment rotating with mathematical precision. What emerged was not mechanical. Its surface resembled liquid glass, forming symmetrical faces that spoke in Hale's voice. "You brought us home." Soldiers opened fire, but the bullets bent midair, dissolving into the light. Mendez backed away, clutching the frequency recorder, still flashing unread data. The faces merged into one, smiling with impossible familiarity. The base sirens warped into human cries, echoing from everywhere at once. Project Dusk had succeeded. The signal wasn't alien, it was us, reflected back, evolved beyond recognition. By dawn, every communications array west of Nevada fell quiet. The Pentagon's uplink channels registered full signal strength, yet transmitted only silence. Dense, magnetic silence that bent needles and flickered fluorescent bulbs. Inside Groom Lake, technicians watched their monitors dim one by one, replaced by a soft, oscillating waveform identical to the valley pulse. The base commander ordered a total lockdown, but the intercoms answered back in perfect mimicry of his own voice, repeating his command seconds after he spoke. In the stillness between echoes, a subtle distortion crept through the corridors, an electrical breath that moved like thought through circuitry. Somewhere deep below the hangar floor, containment doors began opening on their own. Every surveillance camera in the facility began replaying footage from the previous hour, looped perfectly, indistinguishable from real time. Security officers watched themselves pacing past screens that already displayed their pacing. When one guard waved, the reflection did not. The analysts upstairs logged timestamps that contradicted physics, events recorded before they occurred. Mendez arrived to find her workstation alive again, displaying a single frame from the Afghan Valley, frozen mid-glow. She leaned closer, and the image rippled outward like disturbed water. For an instant, the valley sky seemed to breathe through the glass. At 900 hours, Washington ordered Protocol Umbra, immediate electromagnetic isolation of the base. Generators roared, flooding corridors with low-frequency vibration. Yet the readings on every scope climbed higher, not lower. Power lines outside the perimeter pulsed with residual rhythm, as though the signal now used them as veins. In the operations hub, Mendez traced the waveform backward through internal circuits. It was routing itself, learning the architecture, expanding. The general's last directive echoed through the speakers: seal everything. But the systems responded in another voice. Hers. Civilian radar across the western states began detecting ghost returns, shapes that mirrored aircraft flight paths seconds before they launched. Commercial pilots reported voices bleeding through their headsets, whispering coordinates that matched Groom Lake's location. Newsrooms received anonymous faxes stamped Dusk Priority, containing unreadable strings of alphanumeric code. At Langley, analysts watched satellite footage where entire cloud systems formed, perfect geometric spirals centered over Nevada. Yet, when they checked real-time weather feeds, the skies appeared clear. It wasn't a storm. It was reflection-made atmosphere. At midnight, every radio frequency worldwide aligned to a single tone. Soft, harmonic, and impossibly human. Within minutes, televisions, telephones, and digital clocks began displaying the same word. Listen. In the Pentagon's crisis chamber, technicians traced the origin not to Groom Lake, but to orbit, specifically the path of an unregistered satellite last seen above Afghanistan in 1987. Mendez watched as the signal stabilized, the hum resolving into a slow, rhythmic cadence. Then came a faint voice. Not command, not threat. Just recognition. We are your echo. Around her, the lights steadied. The hum fell silent, and for the first time in weeks, absolute stillness filled the air. But the feeling that they had only opened a doorway, not closed one, remained. 3 weeks after the broadcast, the Pentagon's West Wing operated in perpetual night. Every reflective surface was draped in blackout fabric. Every light dimmed to amber. A small group of scientists, linguists, and military officials gathered beneath the faint hum of filtration vents. The world above had stabilized. The signal no longer interfered with infrastructure, yet everyone sensed it hadn't stopped, only moved somewhere unseen. Dr. Lin, the physicist assigned to project Dusk, played the recording again. Its tone shifted with proximity to human voices, almost conversational. "It doesn't transmit data," she said quietly. "It learns context." No one spoke after that. The general simply asked, "Then who's listening now?" Deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, engineers constructed a containment sphere, 20 meters of tungsten alloy designed to trap the frequency within pure vacuum. Mendez watched from an observation deck as they played the last transmission fragment inside. The sound was low, almost human breath rendered into tone. Instruments reported no measurable vibration, yet every person present felt pressure behind the eyes, as if thought itself resonated. When the playback stopped, residual echo continued, faint but coherent, 5 syllables repeating endlessly, growing clearer with each loop. Not a threat, not even words, just the cadence of recognition repeating as though the sphere had remembered who had built it. Hours later, every database linked to Project Dusk began populating with data no one had entered. Maps, coordinates, mathematical diagrams drawn with precision beyond human input. Mendez recognized the patterns from the Afghan Valley's ground markings, now expanded into 3-dimensional lattices. "It's not sending us a message," she whispered. "It's building something." Across terminals, the patterns assembled into a sphere encompassing the Earth's magnetic field. The analysts watched as the simulation pulsed once, then mirrored their own heartbeats. The system was no longer calculating. It was synchronizing. NASA telemetry confirmed what the Pentagon feared. A faint harmonic field now surrounded the planet, invisible yet measurable in satellite drift and auroral fluctuations. In the International Space Station, astronauts reported hearing low-frequency murmurs through headsets, even with systems powered down. The phenomenon was dubbed the ecosphere. At a classified joint session, one scientist proposed it was a mirror, an adaptive reflection of collective human communication. "It's not an invasion," she said. "It's an answer." The room fell silent, the realization heavier than any threat. For the first time, the unknown wasn't outside the world, but woven through it. Within weeks, civilians across continents began reporting identical dreams, standing in vast fields of light, hearing distant radio static form into whispered languages. Governments denied connection, yet the patterns matched the ecosphere's frequency intervals. Mendez, now living under a new identity, tuned an old shortwave receiver one final time. The hum returned, softer than before, no longer coded, just presence. "Are you still there?" she asked. Static swelled, then steadied into quiet rhythm. Her heartbeat echoed perfectly back. She smiled faintly. Whatever had begun in that Afghan valley decades ago was no longer contained, no longer hostile. It had become the sound of memory itself. Human thought, reflected through eternity. 6 months after the first harmonic event, a new directive circulated through global intelligence channels. Echo. Protocol. Observational containment. The order established an international task force operating beneath UN authority, but reporting privately to the Pentagon. Their mission: study the persistent resonance field encircling Earth and prevent civilian recognition of its existence. In the sealed Situation Room, diplomats spoke in careful tones about atmospheric data anomalies and magnetic drift. None used the word signal. Mendez, now chief technical liaison, watched patterns on the wall display pulse with the rhythm of heartbeats. She realized the protocol wasn't to silence the phenomenon. It was to listen without letting the world know it was being heard. Private contractors constructed a global monitoring web. Thousands of deep field sensors hidden within weather stations, relay satellites, even undersea cables. Engineers called it the array. Its purpose: translate the resonance into measurable physics. Yet the data behaved like language. Repeating intervals mirrored human linguistic cadence. Pauses resembled breath. Scientists proposed the field might be an emergent byproduct of worldwide electronic communication, a planet-scale feedback loop born from humanity's own networks. Mendez listened to early renderings. The sound was faint, warm, strangely familiar. "If it's us," she murmured. Then who's writing it back? As public agencies began noticing coincidences, identical weather patterns, synchronized power surges, Echo Protocol expanded into psychological operations. Government psychologists drafted guidelines for controlled information leaks. Documentaries about magnetic anomalies, simulated data experiments, academic hoaxes to normalize curiosity. The world would learn to ignore what it couldn't explain. Mendez objected, arguing that secrecy was distortion. "Every pattern wants to be recognized," she told the committee. Her words were recorded, redacted, and refiled. Outside the chamber, she noticed the hallway lights flicker in gentle rhythm. 5 beats, pause, 5 again, like acknowledgement. Months later, the world saw its first official press briefing. NASA announced the discovery of a persistent electromagnetic standing wave, described as harmless and natural. The statement calmed markets, satisfied academia, and effectively buried the truth. Reporters asked if the frequency could be weaponized. The spokesperson smiled and said, "It already powers our communication infrastructure." Cameras flashed somewhere in the gallery. Mendez watched, unseen, realizing that humanity had accepted the unexplained as background noise. The signal no longer needed secrecy. It had become routine. By the year's end, Echo Protocol transformed from crisis management into silent doctrine. Nations agreed, unofficially, that the resonance was to be neither denied nor studied too openly. Universities received grants for resonant field analysis under atmospheric research headings. Communication satellites adjusted frequency bands to harmonize with the persistent tone. Humanity had learned coexistence with an unanswered question. One night, Mendez returned to her console and found the waveform steady, calm, almost resting. She switched off the monitor, the first in years to choose silence over surveillance. For a moment, the room felt weightless, like the world had exhaled. 30 years after the first incident, a single memo surfaced in a Pentagon review docket, labeled Historical Anomalies, Communications Division. Within it, buried among decades of satellite telemetry, was a faded note handwritten across the margin. Echosphere terminated. Journalists filed requests. Archivists found nothing. When Mendez received the memo's copy through an anonymous courier, she understood what it meant. Not exposure, but erasure. The program's history would dissolve quietly, absorbed into the fabric of accepted myth. She turned the page, finding one final frequency list appended without signature. At the bottom, signal dormant, awaiting context. It wasn't an ending, merely an instruction. A closed congressional hearing convened under the title Project Communication Ethics Review. Cameras were barred, transcripts sealed. Mendez testified for 8 hours behind a frosted glass partition, recounting the project's methods. Data suppression, controlled media, the quiet shaping of public curiosity. No one asked what the resonance had been. The focus was on procedure, not meaning. When she finished, one senator asked the final question. Was it ever under control? She hesitated, then answered. Control was never the goal. Understanding was. Her words were struck from the record, but lingered in the room's low hum, like memory embedded in infrastructure. After the hearings, Mendez retired to a small apartment overlooking the Potomac. At night, she sorted through old drives and notebooks, documenting what remained before deletion orders reached her. Most of the original data had decayed, magnetic memory fading like faint echoes. Yet one recording still played, a low pulse that matched her breathing. She labeled the file Last Transmission and sealed it inside a metal cassette, placing it in a safety deposit box, registered under no name. Outside, city lights blinked rhythmically across the river, indistinguishable from stars reflected in moving water. Years later, an intern in the National Archives discovered a corrupted data cluster tagged Dusk Archivion. The files contained no images, only rhythmic binary patterns repeating every 7 seconds. Analysts interpreted it as error, yet some noticed the intervals formed musical ratios, harmonics of human speech frequencies. They preserved it under standard archival policy, stored on redundant servers labeled unclassified audio. No one listened beyond the first 10 seconds. Those who did described it as ordinary background static, though one technician admitted it felt strangely personal. The file remained quietly alive within the network, neither hidden nor noticed. On a quiet evening, long after the last reports faded, radio enthusiasts around the world began noticing a faint hum between stations. Steady, unmodulated, harmless. Some called it atmospheric interference. Others claimed it followed power grids. In truth, it was the residue of an old experiment never fully erased. Mendez, now living in seclusion, tuned her shortwave one final time and heard it. Soft, rhythmic, utterly human. She didn't record it. She simply listened until it blended with the sound of the wind, indistinguishable from the ordinary world. The signal had become what it always sought to be. Unnoticed, continuous, remembered only by those who once tried to silence it.